Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. Welcome to Dissonant Dispatch. I'm sorry for the delayed start. I was supposed to start at 8 p.m., but I was recording another broadcast for another podcast, and it ran a little bit longer than I thought it was going to go. So I do apologize. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing so you can be notified when I make more content like this. Please like and share this broadcast to get it out to more people who can join us live and ask questions. Tonight, we're going to be covering something very interesting. At least I think it's very interesting. And that is something that was sent to me from New Jersey just today that illustrates better than anything I've seen in a long time how Freirean, Paulo Freire, is being used in our schools. The ideas of Paulo Freire. If you're unfamiliar with who he is, or was rather, Paulo Freire was educator who came up with the idea of the generative theme or the generative idea, and that education should be for liberation. What do I mean by a generative theme or generative idea? I've written an article about it on Substack. You can read about it in detail, but essentially it means you create a situation or you put children in an environment where they're exposed to certain things that cause them to ask questions, that cause them to bring up topics that give you the opportunity to introduce them to the liberatory ideas that you want them to have. And it's also using material from their own environment so that it's, relevant, right? You've probably heard that, the sort of relevant pedagogy or, it's relational or whatever. So they can relate to it. And then you make but always the negative, always things that would, sound like oppression. And you bring that into their vocabulary and you use it over and over and over again. So they start to get a heightened sense of, I need to be liberated. And they join you in your activist cause of liberating them. But of course, it never ends, because as soon as you're liberated from whatever the thing was that was oppressing you before, now the new thing you have to be liberated from. So it just keeps going. The revolution never ends. And so I've tried to make the case that this is happening in schools. I've tried to show how certain book titles are doing this. But it's really rare that I get an example of something where I go, oh my God, and they're saying it outright. So today I am going to show you some examples of that. What started, and I'm going to have to open these pictures to show it to you. What started off this morning was that I received these pictures. I'm going to try to open these in a way that you guys can see them, and I'll put them on the screen. They are of a session held, I believe, this past Saturday. I want to say this past Saturday morning at a middle school in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And what happened was the students were putting on a play, or they are going to be putting on a play, Seussical Jr. Now, Seussical, you may be familiar with. It was a musical based on Dr. Seuss stories. And the school chose this play. The kids in the middle school are performing the play. And they were called to a rehearsal, an important rehearsal on Saturday morning, early, very early. When they got there, it wasn't so much a rehearsal as it was, well, it might have been eventually, but originally it was a lecture. And the pictures I'm going to show you are of that particular lecture. So let me bring those up, and hopefully it will be easier to speak to. Okay, let's see. Here we go. All right. So this is kind of awkward because it's, got my photo navigation here. But you can see here it says monkeys. Wait a minute. Let me get a different way to do this. I don't want to do it this way. I want to get the pictures to show more clearly. They're essentially talking about the monkeys in Dr. Seuss. And if you recall, it's been said before. I did a video a year ago or so, where we talked about Dr. Seuss and how Dr. Seuss was accused of racism because the monkeys in his books looked like, according to the critics, looked like Black people. Now, I said at the time, if you see Black people in Dr. Seuss monkeys, I'm thinking maybe you're the racist. I don't know, call me crazy. But that seems to be the gist of what they're saying to these children. That the monkey characters in Seussical Jr. were racial stereotypes, and they therefore were going to change. They were going to change the characters to Sneetches. Now, in the original, they're not Sneetches. So why would they be why would you change them to Sneetches? That doesn't make any sense, right? But that is exactly what they decided to do, and they presented to the kids their reasoning. And it's that presentation that I want to show you, is like their justification, their reasoning. Hang on. You never heard that before about Dr. Seuss, that the monkeys were racist? Yeah, I thought it was a little bit crazy myself, but that is what is being said. And every time, there was a time a couple years ago where people were talking about how using a monkey image, it wasn't a monkey, it was a Planet of the Apes, to describe Valerie Jarrett. You may remember this. That use monkeys to describe Valerie Jarrett, or to compare her to the monkeys in Planet of the Apes, was racist. Well, Valerie Jarrett is, I believe, I don't even know if she is Black at all. I don't think she is Black at all. But even then I thought, well, isn't it kind of racist for you to assume that a monkey means a Black person? I mean, I don't see that. So if that's what you see, maybe you're the problem. But this is what they're telling the kids. All right, so let's get these pictures up. All right, I finally have them properly displayed. Okay, so this is the teacher. The presentation, let me go to the proper one because there are multiples. This shows you the one that has the presentation, but then there's one with the title of it was like Monkeys, Racism, and Dr. Seuss. That's still the same one. Monkeys, Racism, Dr. Seuss. This is what oh, it went away. I'm not doing a very good job of this at all today, am I? All right, there it is. Monkeys, Racism, and Dr. Seuss. There's the teacher, I guess, and there are kids in the audience. The next one is the one that has the details. And the details of what they told the children absolutely blew my mind, because the kids, one of the kids went home. I mean, well, I'm sure a few of the kids went home and complained about it, but one of the kids in particular went home and complained, and the dad, or a dad, was pretty upset about it. And then I got these from a parent. Okay, so this is the Rosa's is the school. In response to the negative stereotype illustrated in Seussical, negative stereotype being there are monkeys. Why monkeys? Why, is there a stereotypical monkey that we should be worried about their feelings? I don't know if monkeys have stereotypes, but okay. The stereotypical negative stereotypes illustrated in Seussical, we decided to change Wickersham monkeys to Wickersham Sneetches. So apparently birds don't have feelings, but monkeys do. Right. Yeah. In the 1940s to 2010s, there were no complaints. You're absolutely right. But so they're changing them to Sneetches. Now, this is the part where the indoctrination comes in, and the telling the children what is important. Okay. They're not, this is before rehearsal for this play, by the way, that the school chose. That's how it's a Freirean generative idea. The school chose the play. Why would they choose a play that they think has racial negative stereotypes? So they could have this lesson. That's why they did it. Okay. That's why, of all the musicals they could have done, they chose this. Now, I have no issue with Seussical, the musical, but I also don't see Black people when I look at monkeys. That would be these racist people. So it says, it is important to recognize a wrong and make it right. Hard to argue with that statement, right? But what's the premise? What's the snug premise? That the Wickersham monkeys are a wrong, right? That's the snug premise. So we take a statement that is essentially true. It is important to recognize a wrong and do our best to make it right. Who would argue that? Who would argue that, right? No one. But they're arguing in relation to this musical. Then it is important to use your voice. Well, I don't know. Is it? It might be. Also, not an objectively false statement. It's a matter of when, where, to what degree, why. These questions matter. Are the children encouraged to ask these questions? Are the children even allowed to ask these questions in relation to Seussical? No, they are not. The presupposition is that it's important for them to use their voice to speak against Seussical or against the Wickersham monkeys. That's what it is. It's like we're not only telling you this generalized thing, but we're telling you how to do it. That's my problem. Then it's important to realize that what is popular is not always right, and what is right is not only popular. Oh, do tell. Oh, do tell. You know what's not popular right now? Not using pronouns because people demand them. You know what else is not popular? Saying that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's not very popular right now. But you know, it's important to realize that just because something's popular doesn't make it right. And just because, and what's right is not always popular. You know what's right? Not putting porn in the middle school library, Rosa Middle School, but you have tons of it in your middle school. It's not right, but it happens to not be popular to say so. But you know what? I'm using my voice to say that it's not right. So thank you for the permission to do that. The problem is you're not giving permission to these students to challenge you. It is important to recognize that you can make a difference. Well, again, who would argue that? All of these are true statements that just so happen to not be followed by this woman who is putting them in front of the children. Do you know how confusing that must be for a kid? On some level, the kid knows this. On some level, the kid's going, but when I wanted to say the unpopular thing, I was told that was racist. When I wanted to do the unpopular thing and use my voice, I was told to be quiet. I was told it wasn't empathetic. I was told I had to think of others and not myself. I was told this was the approved opinion, not that opinion. So they're hypocrites. They're not only doing something that is very clearly indoctrination, it is important to do this. It's not a frame of a question. It's not saying what's important, little child. Let's talk about it. Let's explore what's important. No, it's not that. This is what's important, and this is what it means in relation to Seussical. That is straight up indoctrination. What if you're a child who loves Dr. Seuss in this audience or performing this play? What if you totally disagree? What if you're absolutely out of your mind confused as to why this woman or anybody else in the administration at Rosa Middle School sees a Black person and a monkey? What if you're wondering why that is? What if you're a Black child and you're going, hello? Pretty sure Dr. Seuss didn't model his monkeys after Black people. Okay. And if you have evidence to the contrary, I still don't think it follows that everyone sees it that way. You may, but maybe you need to own that and wonder why. Okay. But to tell these children that that's what's important, in response to the negative stereotypes illustrated in Seussical, we decide. Who's we? Hello? Who's we? We decided to change Wickersham monkeys to Wickersham sneeches. No discussion. No open dialogue. We decided. We decided it's racist. That so you're a kid wondering what else is racist that I didn't know was racist. What other thing that looks like, it looks like a monkey, but you tell me it's not a monkey. You tell me it's a stand-in for a Black person. What else am I looking at today that I think is an animal, or I think is a tree, or I think is another thing whatever it is, and you're going to come along and tell me I shouldn't like that thing, I shouldn't see it that way, I should see it a different way. What else? Are they going to trust their eyes and their own minds from now on? No, they're not. No, they're not. It doesn't take many examples of this. You don't have to sit through many Saturday mornings of this kind of a lesson before a kid in middle school is going to go, I'm just going to wait and be told, because it's sort of starting to look like everything can be racist. So I'm just going to have no opinions of my own until somebody tells me what are the right opinions to hold. Because I don't want to risk being socially ostracized, punished, made fun of, thought of as a bad person, etc. Now, as I said, at least one student that I'm aware of went home very upset, loves Dr. Seuss, thinks this is absolutely nuts. And that's just one kid. What if lots of kids felt that way? Where's the empathy for them? Where is the person worried about their confusion and their frustration? Nobody cares. This is what you will think, little child, and this is what you won't think. This is when you won't think. Don't think anymore about characters in your books that actually are not even human. We'll tell you what to think. We'll tell you what to think. So anyway, that is what came up. So I started to wonder, like, where's this coming from? Who runs this school? Who runs this school? Like, who's the principal? And what are the ideas that this principal espouses? Because clearly this couldn't happen. This couldn't happen without the blessing of the principal at the very least. I know the superintendent is of Cherry Hill School District, Joe Meloche, and he's all in on all the critical theories. But basically, just to let you know too, what other, if in case you're wondering what other plays they had to choose from, and they did vote on which one to pick. They had, Legally Blonde, they had other things. In fact, Legally Blonde was first place vote getter amongst the students. They wanted to put on Legally Blonde, which has been on Broadway. Seussical got 0 votes. Another piece of evidence that it was a generative Freirean thing to do. The kids didn't want to do it. Not because they hate Dr. Seuss. They were just like, I like Dr. Seuss well enough, but I want to do Legally Blonde. Nope, can't do Legally Blonde. We're doing Seussical. And then we're going to lecture you about how Seussical is racist. I wonder why they couldn't find something to lecture them on about Legally Blonde being racist. I'm sure they could have generated a theme out of Legally Blonde. That's how creative these people are. If you can see black people and monkeys, I'm pretty sure you can find something white supremacist in Legally Blonde. Anyway, so I went looking to see who's the principal, what's going on, what's the deal with this guy. And I found a video. It was a webinar that was put on. I'm going to get to the right place here. I think it's like around, yes, the speaker. This is Principal George Guy. George Guy. He's the principal of this school. And I think when you hear parts of this video, some things will become clear about the dude. Okay? So what I'm going to do, what I usually do. Let's see if I can make this better. Does that work? No, it doesn't work when I do it that way. I'm sorry. Let me exit that. Okay. I thought I could make it bigger so you don't see all the junk and you just see him and stuff. So this is George Guy. They're going to introduce him. I'm going to play some of this for you, and we're going to hear him in his own words explain what he's doing at this school.
Thank you very much, George, for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Let me know if you can hear it.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Culturally Responsive Practices, a primer for schools and school districts. Let's get started. When we talk about culturally responsive practices in schools and school districts, it's important for us to be able to understand data. Data is nothing more than information. So there is critical data that we can access within our schools and our school districts, no matter where we may find ourselves. But the key is to interpret the data in ways that can uncover access and opportunity gaps. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
The key is to interpret the data in ways that can uncover opportunity gaps. Interpret the data in those ways. Anyone hear anything strange about that? Why is that the key? Why are we taking the data and saying this is how we're going to interpret the data? That seems strange to me, but okay.
We need to be able to understand that schools and school districts are made up of individuals and collectives, and both individuals.
I'm sorry, what? School, this is one of those premises that people will sneak past you and you'll hear it and go into whatever. Schools are made up of individuals and collectives. What's a collective? What are the collectives that are making up the school? And what does he mean by collectives? And he's saying collective assumptions about achievement. How does he know? Is he a mind reader that he knows what can groups think? Okay, we joke about it. We say, "Oh, it's groupthink," right? So we joke about how there's such a thing as groupthink, and everyone's like all thinking the same things. But is that actually real? I mean, people might choose to go along with the group or whatever, but is there such a thing as the Borg that you can quantify and use data to analyze? I would argue no.
Individuals and collectives have their own different assumptions about achievement, about access, about opportunities, and about how culturally responsive practices should be enacted.
Culturally responsive practices. What are those? So collectives and individuals have assumptions about this thing I'm not going to define for you because it's very broad. Culturally responsive practices. That is an ever-moving target. That will change depending upon what people like him want it to mean. It'll mean one thing today and something totally different tomorrow because they have to keep the problem going. So even if you implemented what he says or cultural responsive practices today, if it doesn't work the way he says it's going to work, if it doesn't deliver what he claims it will deliver, he'll say it's because it wasn't responsive enough. It wasn't the right kind of culturally responsive. Whatever it wasn't the right thing. And you know how you can get away with that? Because it isn't a thing that you can measure, that you can objectively define. It's an ever-moving target. So, understanding individual and collective assumptions. We got to understand how the Borg thinks about achievement and collective blah, 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 blah. This is, in other words, word salad, lots of words, means nothing.
We're going to speak very briefly to understanding the differences between what individuals bring with them because they don't leave their values and belief systems in their cars when they park at their prospective schools.
That is true. Thank you for stating the obvious. That is true of teachers too. So when we say as parents that the teachers are bringing their own biases and their own beliefs about worldview, Marxism, et cetera, into the classroom, and you tell us we're crazy and we're domestic terrorists and we're paranoid. No, we're just saying the same thing you're saying. We're just saying that those biases they're bringing in, we don't like. We don't want that bias in the classroom. We don't want it reflected. You're saying you think the bias is something else and you like the bias that you're pushing them to bring into the classroom. And this is why I published that video earlier today saying that this is why state school is folly. It's political. You're always going to have this friction. You're always going to have this tension of somebody going, people shouldn't be biased this way, but they should be biased this way. And the only way you're going to ever stop that is if it's not political, if it's not your dollars, if it's not exposed to this power game of I want power, but I want power, but I want my ideas, but I want my ideas. You don't have that when you literally choose your child's education and handpick it and do it yourself or design your own little school or go to a private school where you can be reasonably well assured that 98% of you agree about what point of view and bias is coming in the classroom. You're not going to have a neutral education environment, even privately. If you're homeschooling, it's not neutral. Your opinions are in there. So he's not saying anything that isn't true. He's just telling you, we don't like the bias they might bring. We want them to have a different bias. Let's be honest. Let's at least be honest about what's going on here.
So what they bring individually, and then what is it that we do in a system collectively.
By the way, he's not wrong about that either. When it is a system, the system will act in a certain way because systems have to have, certain standardized procedures. Okay, so the system will have a bias. Here's a pro tip: the system's bias is always in favor of the system. It's always in favor of the system. So whatever supports the system, like it's its own organism, that is what the bias will be. And you will always be fighting that. No matter what, no matter who runs the system, it is irrelevant. Whether it's Republicans, Democrats, communists, social, it doesn't matter. The system will do what is in the system's best interest. It will not work against itself. So he's not wrong that there is a systemic bias, but it's towards the system. And he's being dishonest about that.
It relates to our assumptions around achievement. We also want to talk a bit about how is it that schools and school districts begin to take a more disciplined approach to diagnose and tackle equity issues.
I wonder what that would mean. What would a disciplined process to diagnose and tackle equity issues be? First of all, what would equity issues be? Well, he's going to talk about that a little bit, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But I want you to think about that as he continues talking. I want you to think about what it means to have a disciplined process to diagnose and tackle equity issues. I thought the idea was to bring about equity and not have anything left to diagnose. So are you saying you can't ever achieve it? It's just a sickness you have to continue to find and treat and find and treat. It's like always there? Interesting.
For schools and school districts, there are so many things that are on the forefront of what it is that we must do to make sure that children arrive at our doors safely and leave safely and securely.
No. No. Is that, I mean, yes, they have in loco parentis. They should make sure your kids are safe to the best of their ability. But that's not what he means. He's just said we need to make sure they arrive at our doors safely. I don't think he's talking about the bus. I don't think he's talking about the bus. I mean, he's talking about what's going on in your house. And then leave safely. Also, probably not talking about the bus or the car ride. So he's talking about cradle to grave, wake up to go to bed.
Security being the utmost right now in our country that we are most concerned about. And that
No, it's not. Is security the number one thing you're worried about with your kids going to school? Or are you more worried about actually learning a damn thing worth knowing when they go to school? To me, looking at the scores and our literacy rates and so on, and the rise in mental health problems, I'm kind of more worried about achievement. I'm kind of more worried about we have a serious, serious problem with literacy in this country and numeracy. And everything flows from that. I'm sorry, you're not going to have self-esteem and mental wellness until you can read. Until you have the majority of students feel like I go to this place called school to learn and I'm actually learning things that are useful to me. Where else is your self-esteem going to come from? Oh, how was school? Can you read? No, I don't want to tell my parents I can't read. I don't like to read. Don't want to read. School is an absolute bore where I get lectured at constantly about how the world sucks and it's going to end soon. And maybe I shouldn't feel so good about myself because I'm the wrong race. I'm a victim. I'm an oppressor. Maybe I'm trapped in the wrong body. Maybe I should want to be something else. Oh, by the way, here's some porn. I think I don't want to be a girl anymore because if that's what boys want, ew. I think I don't want to be a boy anymore because, whatever. Safe, he says. They should be safe at school. They're not safe from school.
the forefront. But how is it that we use a disciplined inquiry approach to begin to look more critically at what it is that we can diagnose based on our resources?
It is really hard for me to listen to people who talk like this. There's so many words and so little meaning, so much noise, so little signal. And what we can diagnose based on our resources, what we can look at more critically. Did you guys hear any meaning in there? We need to look more critically. We need to diagnose based on, diagnose what? Look more critically at what? And more important, why? Why?
And how can we specifically tackle equity issues in a manageable way so that we are seeing progress?
How can we tackle equity issues in a manageable way so that we can see progress? That's multiple things in one sentence. How we can tackle equity issues in a manageable way. Is it unmanageable? Do you have so many equity issues that you're just like drowning in equity issues? My goodness, where are all of these equity issues? Please elaborate. And then so we can see progress at what? Managing equity issues or at academic achievement or at something else? See, it's a little unclear. I think we're left to believe that we're just so we can see progress in the equity issues. But what would that look like? What would that look like? Everyone failing? Equity! Everyone's failing equally. Yay! We have achieved. We have resolved our equity issue of some people succeeding and other people failing. Now everyone's failing. We win. What would achievement look like? What would seeing progress look like? What would the progress be? Is the progress lifting up the lowest to the middle and keeping the high ones what? Coming down to the middle? Is that equity now? Like, what do you mean, sir?
And we need to make sure that our shared commitment to an equity agenda is something that everyone agrees with.
So we have to make sure that our shared commitment is something everyone agrees with. Well, then it isn't a shared commitment, is it? If you don't all agree, it's not a shared commitment. What he's saying openly is we need to get everyone on board with the thing that we want them to agree on. Right? Our shared commitment is something everyone agrees with. Well, then you don't share it. Whose shared commitment? You and 5 other people, you and the teachers, you and the district administrators, but not the parents, not the students. Who's we in this sentence? And why am I the only person hearing a guy talking about, we really don't have any room for anyone to disagree here?
Specifically about individual and collective assumptions.
Again, with the individual and collective assumptions. If there were individual assumptions you disagree with, name them. What are they? Name them and who holds them. If there are collective assumptions that you identify, who are the collectives that hold them? What are they? And what should they be instead? Own it, sir. Name them. Name what they are. And name the people you're talking about. Because otherwise it's gobbledygook. Otherwise, what you're saying is a lot of nothing.
What is it individually that we think our equity agenda needs to be?
This is something I've noticed lately about these people. By these people, I mean people who are in education and think they're very smart and they're asked to be speakers at these webinars. They give you many, many, many questions. Very few answers. What is this? And what is that? And what is this? And what is that? And you're left walking around going, I don't know the answer to any of those questions. I must be dumb. They must be smart because they ask the questions. Nope. They don't have the answers either. They just think that by asking a lot of questions you don't know the answers to because you don't even understand the question, that you'll feel stupid and you'll shut up. When, in fact, you shouldn't ever feel like that when it comes to your child's education. What is it that we individually think our equity agenda needs to be? Non-existent. That's my answer. It needs to not be.
And then as a collective, what is it that
we are not a collective? We are not a collective. Okay. Parents and the kids who show up at your school are forced to be there. That's not voluntary. It's not. I mean, it is, but it's, you know what I'm saying? Like it's for most people, they say it's involuntary. Like if I don't go and I don't have any place to go, I'm going to be there at the tip of a gun or I'm truant. Okay. So it's not this voluntary choice they make it out to be. And as a collective, what is it that we can agree upon is absolutely essential. Again, we're not a collective, sir. Unless you're literally leaving us, the parents and the kids out. Are you speaking about the administrators? Are you speaking about the teachers? Are you speaking about who are you speaking about? And are you really all in lockstep that you're a collective?
we can agree upon that is absolutely essential for all children to.
Is there anything that we can agree upon that is absolutely essential for all children to know and be able to do? Not the rest of the sentence, just know and be able to do. Read. I think Line 10 people up in the street. Do you think it's absolutely essential for all children to be able to do or to know how to do? Yes, to read. At least 9 out of 10 probably will say that. Okay. But he adds the next clause as it relates to access and opportunity.
Know and be able to do as it relates to access and opportunity in a culturally responsive environment.
Why would you even be remotely concerned with your child, that something being essential for your child to know and know how to do as it relates to being able to access opportunity in a culturally responsive environment? That's a big concept for small people. I would love to see someone ask their first grader, honey, do you know how to access opportunity in a culturally responsive environment? You don't? Oh my goodness, the school has failed. My child does not know how to access opportunity in a culturally responsive environment. Does your child even know what a culturally responsive environment is? Do you? Probably not, because again, it keeps changing. We don't know. Whose culture? What kind of responses? To what degree? Instead of what? What's the alternative? A not culturally responsive environment? Why is that automatically bad? What would that look like? What does this look like? We don't know. But we got to identify what is essential for your child to know and know how to do to access opportunity. And then, oh my God, I'm pretty sure my college student doesn't know exactly what to do to access opportunity in her college, whether it's culturally responsive or not. She's learning as she goes how to find opportunities and how to figure it out. And you know what skills she's using to figure it out? Reading. Amazing. When she doesn't know how to access an opportunity, do you know what she does? She looks it up using reading. She asks questions using her brain. Having read things about how to ask questions, she might even write the occasional email, properly punctuated and spelled, so that she can communicate effectively with other people to get her needs met and ask questions about how to access opportunity. And if she can't access the opportunity for one reason or another, she's probably going to go somewhere else where she can access opportunity, because she's not a tree and she can get up and walk and go somewhere else. She can leave. She can take her scholarship, not literal money scholarship, but her being a student somewhere else along with her money. But your average K-12 kid, they can't do that. Nor can their parents, for that matter.
So we hope to cover these 4 things in a very, very specific way.
A very, very specific way, not just a specific way. Did you know that you could have a specific way and a very, very specific way? Is that like being like very pregnant? I don't know. Like when I hear educators talk like this, I'm like, everything else you're saying is circumspect, because you can't even formulate a sentence that makes any sense.
Open up the door for conversation for the culturally responsive practices that you'll find in your own environments.
I've yet to hear anything of substance yet. Have you? You guys, honestly, in the comments, you've been listening to this dude and to me, and I grant you, I've been interrupting every like 5 seconds and not exactly letting the guy's words hang in your head. But you see it's all written there and you can read it in the bottom. Do you have any idea what he's talking about? Am I the stupid one? Like, am I just the only person here who's like, wah, 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 wah? Let me know in the comments, because I'm feeling like been listening a while. Dude is on, let's see, he started at like 3 minutes and change. He's been talking for 3 minutes and I've yet to hear anything. Just curious.
So we're going to take a look at the value of data today. We're going to make sure that when we talk about the value of data, we're going to talk a little bit about being data rich and information poor. We certainly do not want to be drippy in working with our data. We want to talk about the difference between change versus improvement. From what I understand, there's a whole lot of change that's going on in schools and school districts. but how are we actually measuring improvement?
These are actually good questions. Now he's getting to questions like, these are good questions. And yeah, you're right. We don't want to be data rich and information poor. And we do want to measure improvement. We don't just want change for its own sake. So I'm with you now, buddy. Okay, I'm listening. I'm listening. Let's go.
We want to make sure that the forgotten thing that we really deal with when we talk about improvement is monitoring. And what is
Okay.
it that we decide to monitor? And are we monitoring for effective outcomes? And do
What's an effective outcome? I want to know. And I'm going to be looking for it.
we all have a shared understanding of that term, effective, as it relates to equity, access, and opportunity?
I don't. I don't understand that term as it relates to equity, access, and opportunity. What is an effective outcome as it relates to access and opportunity? I thought effective outcomes were the kid learned something. The kids learned it. I don't want the outcome to be they all came to class and they all were able to get the audiobook and they all had access to the teacher who was in the room. Yay! But none of them learned to read because the teacher is an idiot. Or they, they were just indoctrinated for 8 hours a day because that's what the teacher knew how to do. Like access and opportunity to what? Access to what?
We want to make sure that we understand what barriers exist, whether they are mindset barriers, whether they are values and belief barriers, whether
This is a fancy way of saying we got to find out who the people are who still disagree with us. And we've got to diagnose them as having something wrong with them, right? Attitude, belief system barrier. That's just a fancy euphemism for they disagree with us.
they are systemic barriers in our schools
And we're going to call them racist.
and school districts. But we want to make sure that we understand what those barriers are and that we put up some things in place to begin to overcome those barriers.
Put up some things in place. What do you think that means? To begin to overcome those barriers. Well, since the barriers are mostly going to be parents who disagree with your approach and don't want so-called culturally relevant pedagogy in their school because they know that that's code for critical race theory, as the Dr. Seussical Seuss situation in his school demonstrates. I'm pretty sure what you're talking about putting some things in place would be things like the ban on the parents from your library. Parents are banned from visiting the library at his school. They can't go in there anymore because a parent whistleblower went and took pictures of the lovely displays, which I did in a dispatch about a month ago, of the lovely books like This Book is Gay and, all the stuff prominently displayed in the middle school library. And now because of that, parents are not allowed in the library. That was his response. So is that putting some things in place to begin to overcome those barriers so that we can enhance culturally relevant teaching? Is that what you mean by putting some things in place? Like a prohibition on parents coming into the school? Because that's what it seems like to me.
So that we can enhance culturally relevant practices in our schools and school districts.
Enhance. Yeah, so we can keep doing it without any interference from those pesky parents who disagree.
Some folks say that
some people. We are people. We're not folks.
We should come up with best practices as they relate to culturally relevant or culturally responsive practices.
Yeah, why not? How about just a definition? How about just a clear, objective definition of culturally relevant and culturally responsive practices? Because that is the biggest pile of, in the history of pedagogical malpractice. Let's come up with the most broad, general, impossible to define thing and call it a name no one can assail without being called racist. And then we're going to, fend off anyone who says, can we have some best practices? Can we have a definition? Well,
I tend to use the term wise. These are
wise.
things that we know can be replicated in rural environments, in urban environments.
If it can be replicated so easily in a rural and an urban environment, is it very culturally responsive? Doesn't that seem contradictory? The culture of a rural environment is dramatically different from the culture of an urban environment. The culture in which children are growing up in a rural environment is dramatically different. I don't care what race they are. You cannot replicate your culturally responsive pedagogy in those two environments. You can't. What?
In suburban environments, in metro urban environments, things that we know based from a research standpoint and a practitioner standpoint.
What's a research standpoint mean? And what's a practitioner standpoint? Do you have research to show us that how those are different? How there's like one practice that is culturally relevant praxis or practice as teaching that you can then go and say, I'm in a rural environment, and if I use this practice, it will work well here. And if I use this practice, it will work as well in downtown Manhattan. But it's culturally relevant. I would love to get a hold of that wise thing. I would love to see what an example is that he's describing.
That have been done in all three or all four of those environments that we want to call wise. I would hesitant to say that they are best practices because they are not necessarily replicatable in all four of those aforementioned environments.
So he's saying best practices are what you can replicate. Wise practices you cannot replicate. Is that what he's saying? That's what it sounds like he's saying.
So many of us have seen this picture before, and
oh yeah, we've seen this picture before. I fixed it. Let me see if I can find my fix of it, because see how it says equality, equity, reality, and liberation? Okay, this is what I call these. Okay, this is called standardization, which is what we have. It's standardization. Yes, equality under the law is a standardized thing. Some people will achieve more than other people because that's how people function, especially in a standardized environment. That's the only way to do it. And when you are taking taxpayer dollars and you are creating one size fits all, because you have to, because we have rights in America that if you take our money, you can't arbitrarily give me less than you give somebody else just because you think so. I mean, you can't do that. We're equal under the law. And certainly a child starting out in kindergarten, you don't know. You can't decide by the color of their skin that they're automatically lower or higher or whatever than somebody else. You don't know that. You could have a white kid who's got 3 different kinds of learning disability, and they come from a poor household, or they're a divorced household, and there's problems, or somebody's sick all the time, there's chaos and whatever, but they're white. You can't decide that that kid is already the tall one on the box, but the black kid whose parents are surgeons, but he's in the little box because race. And that's exactly what we have going on right now. You have to look at so many different factors, and then you'd have to individualize the instruction, which you can't easily do in a standardized environment with the staff that you have and the resources you have. You can't do it. So that's why we go with equality, because if you're going to have a standardized system, it's the only fair way to do it. That's what that is called, standardization. Equity is what I would call injustice, unfair, arbitrary. Hey, dude, you're tall. You're going to stand. You don't get any boxes. You don't get any scaffolding. You don't get any help. You're fine. You're my daughter at the age of 8 who could read as well as most college students, going into 3rd grade and told, here, tutor the other kids. You're fine. You can read already. They can't. You help them. But I want to read my own books, and I want to learn, and I want to keep learning. No, you're fine. You're fine. You're already ahead of everybody else, so you can stand still for a while and you can help the other kids. That's picture number 2. And that is grotesquely unfair. You're literally depriving my child or somebody else's child in a similar situation of opportunity and access to learning. You're not being culturally responsive to her needs or her culture, which is one where learning is prized and she learned to read at a young age at a very high level. You're not respecting any of that. You're quite literally discriminating against that because your arbitrary bias is you're fine. Tall guy, for all we know, we don't know. Tall guy might be blind in one eye, might have Coke bottle thick glasses. Tall guy might be deaf. Tall guy might not understand baseball at all. So even though he's tall and he can see it, he has no idea what's going on. No. One dimension. That's all we need. Okay. Box number 3. They're claiming this is reality. I wish I had some water. They're claiming it's reality that the tall guy is on big boxes, that he has more than anybody because he's tall. Like I said, they did that to my daughter. And I have to get water. Sorry. And that's an assumption. And I don't even understand what it's based on. They're claiming that reality is already that if you come in with an advantage, you're given more advantage in the public school setting. Where's the evidence for that? My daughter wasn't given that. Most gifted kids I know are not given that. What's that based on? This is literally just like, I don't know, bias talking, presumption talking. Where is this even coming from? They're saying that's reality. There's no evidence of that. And then they're saying liberation is everyone gets to see the baseball game apparently for free. I call that theft. That's theft. We take the fence down where obviously they didn't buy a ticket. They're watching the baseball game already. They're kind of like cheating. This is the dumbest, by the way, metaphor I've ever seen, but okay. And liberation is taking down all the barriers. So what does this mean? To me, the equivalent in the school is everyone gets an A. You showed up, you get an A. They showed up to the baseball game. Here, watch the game. You get an A. They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to buy a ticket. They didn't have to participate in any way. They didn't have to do anything. They all get the equal outcome, which is access to the game without having to do anything to earn the game. If the game is learning, if the game is education, they didn't have to do anything. They just had it handed to them. All had it handed to them. Which is ironic because they said that Mr. Tall Guy had all the advantage coming in. Is it really equity? Because now he's still got whatever advantage he showed up with. Doesn't he? I mean, they're seeing the game, but he's still tall. Shouldn't they be like chopping half his legs off or something? I mean, I don't see how it's equity. He still can see more of the game than the little guy. I mean, this is dumb. But this is what they do.
I think we have seen equality and we've seen equity and we've seen reality, but we haven't talked very much about liberation.
Because that's not the job of school. Our children are not de facto oppressed in ways that school is the appropriate place to liberate them. So in other words, to the extent any child is oppressed, it's not under the law. We have civil rights in this country. And until such time as somebody demonstrates to me that we don't, that their civil rights are being violated, which by the way is easier to do these days against people like him talking than on his behalf. So until I see some evidence that civil rights are being wantonly, rejected and trounced, he's talking out as what. Schools are not there to liberate anybody. We are liberated. We live in a society with a Bill of Rights. There has been a Civil Rights Act passed. We have civil rights protections. What the hell is he talking about? Liberated from what? Well, I think we all know. Liberated from any ideas from the past that he doesn't like.
So let me delve into the picture that we have. If you are unfamiliar with it, we see the equality frame where every child in our school districts gets the same box, but every child isn't built the same and
Yes, that's called reality.
Child doesn't start their race at the same point in life.
Life sucks. I don't say that to be mean or glib or whatever. That is literally reality. And when you get out into the world, you're going to need to deal with that. But you know what you learn when you don't start your race in the same place, but you got to run the race is you develop adaptations to do it. You find ways to, deal with your weaknesses and play to your strengths. He's assuming this is called the it's a fallacy where you assume that where people start is where they'll remain. You don't allow for growth. You don't even accept that evolution is a thing. And I don't mean evolution like, fossils and so forth, and dinosaurs to birds. I'm talking about human beings learning and growing and adapting to their environment in such a way that enhances their survival. Okay. I was extremely small for my age as a child. I was put ahead of grade, and you would think, well, doesn't that mean you're ahead? No, it was to my detriment. It was to my detriment. So I had to adapt. I had to find ways to cope with that. And I'm not suggesting that we like wantonly throw kids into situations that they, have to struggle or that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we're always going to be we're always fighting some battle. Tall guy has his own battle. You don't know what it is. Short guy has his own strength. You don't know what it is. But instead of teaching these kids, giving them a standard access and then having a gifted born teacher, a teacher who actually cares about individuals, not skin colors, not socioeconomic statuses, who can go and say, I get a classroom of 12, 15, even 20 kids, and I spend every day with them. There's no excuse for me not to know them pretty damn well after the first month of spending all damn day with them. And that way, surveys aside, data aside, I'm a human being. I should be able, it's a relational task education. I should be able to interact with these kids and go, my little short dude over here, he is sharp. He's quick. He's very, he really understands these kinds of concepts. Tall guy, on the other hand, he's pretty good at this, but he struggles with that. So you know what I'm going to do? You know what I'm going to do? I am going to look for opportunities where these two kids can maybe help each other out, work with each other voluntarily, of course. I'm not going to make them do it. I'm just going to say, hey, he knows a lot of stuff about this and you know a lot of stuff about that. And you guys can maybe help each other. Or I'm going to supply short kid with some stuff that plays to his strengths and helps him cope with his weaknesses and so forth. I'm going to do that. I, the teacher, the trained professional in the room who's supposed to actually give a living crap about the individuals in my care. I wouldn't even as a teacher look to the building, the state, the system to put in place wise practices and special structures and extra things to make that happen. Because you know what? You can't. Because now you're separating the individuals out from it again. You're treating these kids like cogs, like a collective of short people and tall people and this people and that people. No, you can't do that. Now what you're talking about is teacher education, where you tell the teacher, be a good observer of individual human beings. Get to know your individual students and address their needs as best you can within this standardized environment. And when you can't, raise the flag for some help. And here are these specialists who can help, because this kid's needs go beyond what you can do. They have dyslexia. This person's needs go beyond what you can do. They are literally gifted. They need a special program, special books, etc. You need to point that out for them as an individual. But no, there's no way I can structure my whole class to be standardized in a way that the short kid gets what all short kids need, and tall kids, and they gotta down here because they'll be fine. That is just rearranging the standardization to a different shape of standardization. Somebody different loses. But I think we know who he wants that to be.
Then we see the equity frame, or the reality frame right below it, which is there is a certain level of advantage, or dare I say privilege.
Dare I say? I'm pretty sure you weren't worried about daring to say it. Again, he's calling it privilege. He's calling it privilege. How does he know? I was called privilege. I mean, by people like this, they would call me privileged growing up. They'd say, well, you lived in a nice house. Your dad had a good job. Whatever, drove a decent car, whatever. You were privileged. Was I, though? Was I? My mom left when I was 8. She was abusive. Okay. That didn't show on the outside. Nobody knew. All right. I had lots and lots of health problems as a young child. I was in and out of the hospital for the first 7 years of my life. And then I had all kinds of other hospitalizations. I broke my leg twice, 5th grade and 6th grade. I was in the hospital in and out for that. Lots and lots of problems. I had a birth defect where my jaw grew too far. I had all kinds of issues that really impacted my self-esteem. It impacted my sense of security. It impacted like my ability to focus on school because I was out of school for months at a time with health issues, etc. But on paper, I was privileged. I was privileged. I can assure you I didn't feel privileged. And it didn't really show in my schoolwork. I mean, it showed in my reading ability. That's great, but my grades sucked until I got to like 9th grade and I finally started to catch up with myself. But by today's standards, they would have been like, what the hell's wrong with you? You're so privileged. What's going on? This is that fallacy I was talking about. Where you're born on paper, socioeconomic level, color your skin, that is where you'll stay. That is what defines you. That is who you are. No, it is not. Human beings are much more complicated than that.
Some of our students are coming to, and privilege and advantage is not a negative term. It just means that there is some inequality that some of our students coming from different parts of our communities share, and they can be all sorts of things. But that privilege will put one of our students or some of our students at an incredible advantage while others are at an incredible disadvantage.
That's the fixed pie fallacy. That if I come in with parents who are well educated, lots of books in the house, they prize education, they get me a tutor, they have money for that, they're really focused on the schooling, what's going on, that my ability to do that creates a disadvantage for somebody else, that because they don't have those things, they're at a disadvantage, that they can't possibly learn at the same level I'm learning. Well, what if they have a much higher IQ? What if, because they're coming in from whatever, disadvantaged status in terms of socioeconomic level, they're getting free tutoring or free something else, or somebody's paying lots and lots of attention to them in the class because they presume that they need more help, and they don't happen to notice that despite all my tutoring, despite my educated parents, I've got a lurking learning disability that everyone's ignoring and nobody pays any attention to because they assume that because I come from this privileged household, it was all taken care of. So I go years without anybody even noticing that I can't read. Now I'm talking about my sister. Cannot read. Make it all the way to 6th grade and I'm functionally illiterate. But the other kid, he comes in, let's get going. We got IDA, we got special need, we got this, we got that. He's kind of, they don't have advantage, they're disadvantaged. Are they? Maybe, maybe not. But he's presuming they are based on superficial things.
If we go to the top right block, we'll see the equity frame, which is using the same 3 resources, the same 3 crates, to provide an equity module so that all 3 of the children can see the baseball game. And to take Paulo Freire's work around liberation.
There it is. And to take Paulo Freire's work around liberation, did you notice how he emphasized that word? So again, out in the open, Paulo Freire.
We know that when we talk about equity and equality and culturally responsive work, we really want to move toward liberation. Liberation.
Who's we? Who are you speaking for here? Why? I've yet to hear why. In comparison to what? Compared to what? Or else what? Why do we want to do this? Why do we want to move towards liberation? If liberation is they all get to see a baseball game for free with their whole bodies, what is that? What is liberation? What does it even look like? They have no obstacles? None at all? Not even any form of measurement? They don't even have to perform? That's being liberated?
Is removing the crates, removing the obstacle of the actual fence, so that we're empowering learners to see that educational equity should only be the baseline.
Wow. So educational equity is only the baseline, guys. It's not enough to deliver them equal outcomes in education. What's the ultimate?
But liberation or cognition, and when I talk about cognition, I'm talking about the ability of one to engage within their own solution making.
This is what Paulo Freire taught: critical consciousness. It's not enough to have educational equity. You need to be critically conscious of all the obstacles in your way and all the oppression that you face. And you have to be critically aware of all the things. And then apparently you can be in charge of your own solution making, but not you as an individual.
That's the continual process that schools and school districts should engage with each and every one of their stakeholders.
Stakeholders are not students and they are not parents. So they should engage with every one of their stakeholders. They're talking about teachers, administrators, right? Unions, etc. They're talking about, they're not talking about the kids. They're talking about activist groups. The stakeholders are people who ostensibly will benefit from these critically conscious children for whom equity is the baseline.
And hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that as we go through this webinar. So, for those of you who don't know Mike Schmoker, one of his most famous books that I'm really in love with is Focus. And as I took this quote from the book on Focus, things get done only if the data we gather can inform and inspire those in a position to make a difference. And
everybody in this webinar is in a position to make a difference. But what difference? Things only get done if the data we gather can inform and inspire those in a position to make a difference. Why has it got to be data? Shouldn't the children in front of your face be enough to inspire you to make a difference?
Everybody on this webinar is in a position to make a difference, and that's why we're here. So we really need to begin to talk about the data that we're reviewing in schools and school districts. We certainly are reviewing data that deals with student achievements and student achievement gaps, and we are dealing with data that deals with access and opportunity.
I am dying to know what that data is. What data deals with access and opportunity? Is it how many kids are enrolled in AP classes? Is it how many kids are absent each day? Is it how many kids are getting disciplined and being suspended? Are they calling that data about access and opportunity? I really don't know. I don't know what the data points are that you use to evaluate access and opportunity, because we don't believe for a second they're literally closing doors to classrooms and saying you can't come in. The only time that might happen is, I'm sorry, kiddo, the class is full. The AP class is full. We can't fit more than 30 kids in the class, and you signed up late. Sorry. Okay, maybe you have data on, we had 30 seats and 50 kids wanted to be in AP, and we didn't have enough teachers, so they didn't get access to AP. But, oddly enough, I'm pretty sure that's not what they're evaluating. When they talk about gaps, they're doing it generally by race. They're calling, if there's a difference in how many, if it's not equal, even if there's not equal representation in the school district by race, but if it's not equal numbers, not representative numbers, equal numbers, then they say there's no access. Why? Because they said so. So unless they tell us what the data points are, I'm going to just infer.
But are we dealing with data that is really impactful?
Impactful.
Right now, in many of our school districts, whether we're in rural, urban, or suburban school districts, are historically underserved students.
What the hell is a historically underserved student? Unless the public schools and the unions that staff them have historically been not showing up to work for those kids, they were not underserved. Okay? They were served. If you don't like how they were served, you don't like the quality of teachers they got, you think the buildings were ramshackle, falling apart, whatever. Okay, that's still not underserved. That's, less high quality, or, the quality wasn't as good, whatever. But the education is not a function of how fancy the building is. It's not even a function of how, many teachers you had. If the teachers were very high quality, you don't need many, many of them. If you had, more social workers in one place and another place, I mean, that's debatable whether that was better or worse. What do you mean by underserved? They want you to just accept that at face value. Like, oh, yes, the Black children, the Hispanic children, I'm sure they got less. Why are you sure? Why do you assume that? And less of what? Less of what? Like, what are you saying? Spell it out for us. What are you saying? And I'm going to get shit about that too. Probably somebody's going, you're making fun of disabled people. No, I'm not. I'm saying, talk to me like I literally don't understand my own language and explain to me what underserved means and how did it happen on the U.S. Department of Education's watch, the NEA's watch. These unions have been around forever. Why did they allow it? They're so social justice focused. Why did they allow it? Why didn't they say we can't underserve these students? We need to go serve. And don't tell me it was money, because we spend $1 trillion on education in America every year.
I will take African-American male and females, for example, may find themselves in the minority in their schools, but they find themselves in the majority as it relates.
They find themselves there. How did I get here? How did I get in the majority of the population of disciplined kids? How did that? I found myself. Oh my God, how did I get here? How did this happen? I am so victimized. I was disciplined. Do you see how they twist language? They find themselves in the majority of disciplined students. Just magically happened. I'm sure they're all these teachers are racist. That's it. They're racist. You're Black, you're disciplined. You really think that's what happened? Really? Then you need to fire all the teachers. That's what that is. You need to, if you genuinely believe that the students just happened to find themselves on the receiving end of discipline for no other reason than they were Black, then you should fire the majority of the teachers.
To discipline data, whether that is a lunch or recess detention, a in-school suspension, an after-school suspension, a Saturday suspension. We see disparate numbers for those demographic groups, even though they may be in the minority.
Maybe there's other variables that you're not considering. Maybe more of those kids come from single-parent households. Maybe more of those kids don't have a dad at home at all. We know statistically that's highly likely. Maybe mom or dad or both are working insane hours to put food on the table. And so they're not around to give them guidance. Maybe they live in a neighborhood where where they're getting a lot of guidance from a gang that runs the street. Maybe that gang is also in their school. Maybe they're putting pressure on them that if you don't behave in certain ways at school, then we're going to come after you when you get home. In other words, I'm not disputing that these kids have some pretty significant, call it disadvantage if you want, in their lives compared to kids who don't have those circumstances. And that makes it harder for them to get an education because they're a little preoccupied with other things. But that is still outside the realm of the school's purview. There is a limit to what the school can do. And if they bring that trouble to school and that manifests in poor behavior in the school, what would you like to see happen? Just allow it? Don't discipline them. Allow it because it's unfair to punish them because they have reasons. There are extenuating circumstances that they're misbehaving. They weren't taught properly. They don't have parents at home, etc. So all the other kids and the teacher have to suffer through their acting out, their violence, their confusion, their problems, and they have to wait to get an education. Their access to education has to be cut off because these kids can't access education because they're getting suspended. Is that literally what you're saying? Because it sounds like what you're saying. And based on the chaos I'm seeing in schools with discipline non-existent and kids can't learn at all across the board, I'd say that's what you mean and that's what you're doing. And that is why I said at the outset that you could achieve equity by having everybody be miserable and be like, yay, we did it. Everyone has equal access to opportunity. That is none.
Looking at universal data from the Office of Civil Rights to begin to question what it is that we are doing with this disparate discipline for those two demographic groups?
Maybe it's not anything that you're doing. There are just more kids from that demographic group who are acting out and breaking school rules. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe there's some cultural differences. You want to be culturally relevant, then accept the cultural relevance of the fact that many of these kids are growing up in environments that are chaotic. And that is not the fault of the children who are not. It is not the fault of the parents who are providing for their children. It is not the fault of the people, many of whom are Black, who are doing their level best to raise their kids properly with manners and politeness and all that kind of stuff. It's not their fault. They should not have to pay because you have to disparately discipline some kids that happen to be falling in a certain demographic group. I'm so sick of the refusal to discuss this in reality.
Are we looking more critically at our code of conduct as it relates to how we are applying discipline with those groups?
Why? What that is translated to, in my estimation and my experience, has been we need to change the code of conduct so that they don't get in trouble anymore. Except you know what that does? That causes kids from other demographics to just join right in the misbehavior because what's stopping them now? You're setting a standard. You're teaching the kids what it's okay to get away with. We're not going to discipline these behaviors anymore. You won't get suspended. You won't get sent to the principal. This bad consequence will not occur. And so you see some kids doing it and getting away with it. Why would you not do it? What kind of character lesson are you teaching? What is the moral hazard of loosening the standards?
I had mentioned the data rich and information poor syndrome. We have incredible amounts of data, no matter what state we may find ourselves in. We are getting state data, and then we are getting standardized data. And then in many of our school districts, either we create formative or summative assessments, or they are created for us. And we are going through that data every 4 to 6 weeks. Yet we are still drips, because we are finding out that we're not using the information to help drive instruction, to help.
There's a thing that's going on now in education, you guys, that is really quite disturbing and shows why you don't just hand data to any old person and say, here, interpret it. It takes a lot of skill to figure out what kind of data to pull. And it takes probably even more skill to figure out how to interpret the data, or even if you should interpret the data. And what happens is people falsely assume, especially in education where they're not data experts, they're not even good at math, basic math. They falsely assume that more data will lead to more understanding. Even he pointed out in the beginning that more data doesn't mean, that you get better. And he's right about that. But yet he's still saying we're not getting enough out of the data. Well, maybe because you're getting so much data, it's actually confusing you. You have more noise than signal. And you're not asking the right questions. How many kids who are from these demographic groups are getting disciplined isn't the question you need to be asking. The question you need to be asking are, why are kids acting out? Period. What's going on? What is causing these kids to act this way? And if you can't answer that question with the data, then maybe you should just say, what works? Historically, statistically, what has worked to restore order in a classroom so kids can learn? And the only evidence we have that's actually hard evidence is that discipline works, that removing children who are acting out and misbehaving from a classroom restores order to that classroom. Then the majority of students can learn. So the majority of students get access to the learning, and minority of students do not. But what's the goal here? He says equity. That means every student should have an equal outcome. He's not really interested in as many students as possible learning. He wants equity. If equity is your highest value and not discipline and not academic achievement, you're going to do something dramatically different. So he's using the data to arrive at a different endpoint. It's only as good as it serves you getting to the endpoint you want to get to. So if you don't want to get to the same endpoint he wants to get to, what good is all this data? He's going to interpret it, as he said at the outset, to achieve equity. Now, this thing goes on and on, as you can imagine. I'll put the link in the description box. You can watch the whole webinar if you like. I don't know why you would. It goes on more like this. But I wanted to show you this in relation to the Dr. Seuss thing with the monkeys, because I wanted you to see that here's this guy using all this jargon and all this, word salad, blah, 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 equity, blah, blah, data rich, blah, blah, culturally relevant. But, that's the zoom out, zoom out of big words. Zoom in is monkeys and racism in Dr. Seuss. We don't want the Seussical. We want Legally Blonde. You're getting Dr. Seuss. And then we're going to lecture you about race using Dr. Seuss and Paulo Freire and liberation. That's why I did this show, because I want you to understand that all this blah, blah, blah that most parents go, oh, whatever. I don't understand it. It's like, whatever. That's what it sounds like. But what it looks like to your children is the monkeys of Wickersham are racist. Dr. Seuss is racist. Doesn't matter what you want to do for your play, kiddos. They call them kiddos now. Kiddos. Not children, not ladies and gentlemen, not boys and girls, not even kids. Kiddos. What matters is that we generate a theme around which we can talk about liberation and what the right thing to think is per us. And we can demonstrate for you the contradiction. Remember the contradiction I talked about? I'm going to show you again, because I really want this to stick. I want this to be stuck in your mind, how hypocritical they are. Let's see. Let me get the right screen up here. This is super important with this teacher. All right. So, all right, there we go. Let me get it up here. Because as I said, these statements are true. Okay. See if you can see it. These statements are true. All right. In response to the negative stereotype illustrated in Seussical, we decided to change. So that was their claim. That's their thing. It is important to recognize a wrong and make it right. So student sees that, as I said at the beginning, and says, that sounds right. And here I am, a mom and a teacher, and saying, that sounds right. I mean, and make it right if you can. I mean, it's not an imperative, but if you recognize a wrong, do your best, right? It is important to use your voice also. Sure, why not? Of course, it's important to speak up when you see something that's wrong, It is important to realize that what is popular is not always right, and that what is right is not always popular. The grandest irony of this entire presentation. So you're telling the kid a thing. And it is important to recognize that you can make a difference. So here they're hearing all these core truths, but in action, they're told, not you. Not what you think is wrong, namely choosing this musical over the other one against your wishes. Not what you think is wrong, namely declaring that monkeys are look like black people, which look at this one girl. Look at her face. Okay? So it's the wrong that we point out, not a wrong that you think. Okay? If you think CRT is wrong and all the stuff about gender stuff is wrong and they're teaching it to you and you don't like it and you want to use your voice to say, I don't like it, shut up. You're a bigot. Right? So they're getting a mixed message. It's really important to do these things unless you're you. It's really important to challenge things unless you're you. Unless you disagree with us. And I am here to tell you that this is actually more damaging than if they just came right out and said, from henceforth, you will think X. Because at least it would be obvious to the child. You don't have to be, older than, let's say, 7 or 8, maybe, when somebody goes, you need to think this because I said so. Most kids will be like, because you said so. You've seen it. Kids are like, what do you mean because I said so? Give me a reason. Even at 8 or 9, they'll do that. But if you say, well, it's really important to do this and it'll make you a good person, it's much more damaging because they're like, well, yeah, but when I want to do it, I can't. And that cognitive dissonance causes a lot of confusion. And it is that confusion, that chaos in their brain that is the fertile ground into which they will plant these liberatory thoughts, and they will tell the child that pain you feel, that confusion you feel, that discomfort that's making you feel all icky, especially when you go home and you hear one message and you come here and you hear a different message and you're wondering, should I say something? Should I not something? That's because you're oppressed. That's because your parents are wrong. That's because you need to be liberated. If they were just like this at them and going, think this, do this, say this, they would know the school was the oppressive one. They would know it. Wouldn't be a question. There wouldn't be a triangulation relationship with mom and dad. They wouldn't be pretending to be nice, but not really being nice. The friend that the person who acts like your friend but is really not your friend, they're really just passive aggressively manipulating you and like behind your back, blah, 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 is 10 times worse than one that goes, you look fat in that dress. Right? Because that's the one you're going to go, I don't like you. I don't want to hang out with you anymore. You're mean. And you're going to not hang out with them anymore. But when it goes, I care about you. And I want the best for you. And I just wanted you to know that, but I think you would, do better. That guy that you really like and that I secretly like behind your back. And I'm not really telling you because, I want him for myself. Well, let me tell you the story about him, but I'm just looking out for you. It's that mentality. It's confusing. It's manipulative. It is psychological and emotional abuse. But he calls it equity and liberation and data and this and that. It makes it sound so important and so serious. No, it's just Freirean BS dressed up for fancy company. That's all it is. That's all it is. Dressed up for the consumption of academics and people who get paid to say academic things and get paid to sound, like they know what they're doing and to confuse parents so parents won't be on to the abuse. But that's all it is. I hope I have demystified this a little bit for you, that Freirean ideas are absolutely being used in the schools. Freirean pedagogy is absolutely being done. This is just one example. By the way, this is one school in the Cherry Hill district. They're all like this. They're all like this because the superintendent of this district, Joe Maloche, is absolutely 100% bought in on all this garbage. If not literally, then well enough. His career is made on it. He is all in on it. He's not going to change his mind. You can go to all the school board meetings in the world and yell and scream and rant and rave and cry and whine, and it won't change anything. It's only going to get worse. That's for Cherry Hill people specifically. I hate to tell you, the rest of New Jersey is just as bad. Rutgers is in New Jersey. They're woker than woke, pumping out this garbage locally all day long. So anyway, sorry for the late start. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I know I was a little discombobulated here because of the lateness, but I really appreciate it. And thanks for bearing with me with my little cough. I will put the link to the webinar down below. Share this around with other people who don't really believe it or like, what? Marxist? What? Or who place a lot of stake in data and culturally relevant. You need to ask yourself these questions. What does that mean? Why? Explain. And when people can't or won't or call you names because you ask the questions, that should be a big red flag. All right. So as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're watching or listening on the replay, I appreciate you so much. Please like and share this content. Please subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And I appreciate every one of you so very much. Have a great evening.